Wonderful. So we will go right after worship and proclaim to them how much they are, how much good they do, and how much they proclaim God's love to us, and remind them of that. So anybody who wants to come along, as I said. But back to our reading. So in today's reading, we hear again about how the Pharisees are complaining and grumbling about Jesus, and specifically who Jesus eats with. And then Jesus answers. Jesus answers in 3 parables that all kind of talk about the same thing in a little bit different way. And the first 2 we have in today's reading. The third one is the parable of the prodigal son, which everybody knows. And so it's amazing to see how these parables that tell us about what God is like and how God works, what God's work is like, fall on the Sunday where we celebrate God's work through our hands. And so we joined together to kick off our Sunday school year of learning and what it means to be in the community of Christ by actually doing God's work and actually learning what God's work is by using our hands, learning in a different way. So often when we hear these parables, we focus on what it means to be lost, which is a good thing to focus on. It's the part of the parable that we have the most immediate reaction to, kind of a visceral reaction to being lost, because everybody knows that moment when they realize that either they are lost or they have lost whatever they were supposed to be keeping track of, or whoever they were supposed to be keeping track of. Whether it's a story about moving to the center lane and locking your doors when you take that wrong turn, or that momentarily missing child, or suddenly realizing that you have wandered down the wrong road in a more metaphorical sense, kind of ended up in a place in life that you didn't mean to get to, then we all know what it feels like to be part of that lost and found drama. We know that when we lose our cell phone, if we find it and it's not broken, we're like so excited. We know about this. We've been lost. We've been found. We've lost things. We've lost people. We've found them again with various levels of effort to try and make that happen. But when we just focus on how God finds us, we miss one of the big points of this parable. Because God finding us is one of the big points, but there's another one. Because there's this really direct, pointed contrast between how the Pharisees work in the world and how God works in the world. Who the Pharisees eat with, who God eats with, who Jesus eats with. So when we look at how the shepherd and the woman are working, they are rejoicing. The Pharisees are grumbling, the shepherd and the woman are rejoicing. So to be in the community of God is to do God's work. And to do God's work at the very end of all 3 of these parables is to rejoice and to celebrate. And not only to rejoice over the big things, because it would kind of make more sense. Like, I'm not a shepherd, but I'm thinking if I was trying to get sheep through the wilderness and I made it and I was like, I got 99 sheep through the wilderness. Like, that's what I would want to rejoice about. But Jesus says, no, we're not going to just rejoice about the big things. We're going to rejoice about the little things. It's not that I managed to keep track of 9 of my coins, because that could be a problem. It's that there are 1 missing. Even though it makes no sense to financially to hold a party, spending more than the monetary value of what we lost, because it would have obviously cost more to host a party for friends than 1 silver coin or the 1 sheep that was lost. But to celebrate, and to celebrate out of that abundance of God's love, is where all three of these parables end. So to do God's work with our hands is to show up to God's party, the party that God is throwing, and to pitch in and to make it a celebration to remember. Because while being lost and the searching are all part of the story, and it's all part of something that we get, being lost and being found is something that happens to everybody in our lives. That's not where the story ends. It's not where this story ends, but it's not where the big story ends with the resurrection either. Remember, the disciples were looking for Jesus because they thought that he was going to be in the tomb, and then he wasn't. And it ended up as a celebration. And it doesn't even end when the sheep and the coin are found and everybody's relieved. And it's not just like a little like, woohoo, I found it. Let me post it on Facebook that I lost something and then found it again. This is a huge party with friends and neighbors. It's an actual celebration. The religious authorities of the day, the Pharisees, had this attitude of exclusion and working from a viewpoint, a place of fear and lack. Who should be allowed in and who should be welcome and who should not. And Jesus works out of a place of easy abundance and easy joy, setting the table for a party. So one of the ways that we do God's work, our hands, is to rejoice fearlessly about God's grace coming into people's lives. To be happy about it. Even when those people are sinners, even when they're people that you're like, I'm not sure what's going to happen if I eat supper with them. Because we know those people. Like, not sure what's going to happen. Even if they're people who the only thing that they did to earn this was to get themselves lost. They were that sheep that was like, ooh, grass, and like kept going off and left to the herd. Even when it doesn't make any sense, to rejoice with them, to rejoice with each other, coming from that place that there is enough to be happy about. There is enough to rejoice for. And that's part of what we're doing today. Even though the first responders are rarely going to be seen as somebody that we wouldn't want at the supper table with us, I don't really know anybody who would say that. They're very often people who are overlooked in society. They work nights, they work weekends, they have long shifts. And we don't necessarily see them unless we have recently needed them. So we're going against what society tells us is this normal action of grumbling and mumbling and complaining about whatever the current grumble topic is, because there always is a grumble topic. I guess, whether it has to do with the first responders or not. And instead of joining in the grumbling, instead of joining in with the Pharisees and saying, well, why are we doing this? Why is he doing this? What are they doing? We join in with Jesus and we rejoice, celebrating the people who do God's work with their hands by healing and searching and being present to bear the pain of the world and helping anyone in need. That's one of the things first responders do, is they help anyone. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're at or how you got there or how stupid it was when you said, watch this, right before you needed to call them. They are there to help anybody. And so as we do that, together we're learning what it means to be the body of Christ by actually celebrating. Instead of just thinking about how we were lost or thinking about how awesome it is that there are first responders, we're actually celebrating today. And that's really a neat thing to do together. But that leads to another question. What is it in your life that needs to be celebrated? We think about things that need healing. We think about relationships that need reconciliation. We think about like all these things where stuff isn't quite right. But what in your life needs to be celebrated? All three of the parables against the grumbling of the Pharisees end in rejoicing and celebrating. So within yourself, what do you need to celebrate? Within your family, what do you need to celebrate? When you were lost and you didn't even know it until Jesus stepped in and found you, maybe you need to celebrate that. Maybe when you were diligently searching for something and then you found it, whatever it was, and you gave in to your more practical side and said, no, I have too much to do, I'm not going to celebrate. No parties for this. And what have you celebrated lately? Maybe not an actual party where you actually invited the neighborhood, but even just a private moment of celebrating, where you stood against that world of the Pharisees, which is still going strong, still telling us that we need to exclude people and live from a world of lack, and that there is not enough whatever you want to put in there, to celebrate. That you set that aside and you rejoiced with God, because that is God's work too. And these all three parables, it's the end goal. It's getting to the party. So as we go out this week, as we start our new program year at the congregation, can we dare to do this work of celebrating? Do we dare to believe that there is enough energy and enough money and enough people and enough whatever else to celebrate how God is working in the world, both in this congregation and outside the congregation and in our own lives? And I think that we can, because I know that we believe in that new life that comes from Christ. And when we believe in the resurrection, we know that it ends in rejoicing. And so we can live that rejoicing now, even when the world is telling us it's grumble mumble time and there's not enough. We can still look at the resurrection and say, I was lost and now I'm found, and we're going to party. We're going to rejoice. We're going to celebrate. And then can we show up with our whole selves, even when we feel lost, even when we've just had a ride on Jesus' shoulders? Because Jesus insists on celebrating in those moments too. Because even when we feel lost, we know that God is still searching for us so that we may know that we are found. God knows where we're at, but so that we can know that we're found. So as we go out, we do this work of celebrating, this work of rejoicing, both as a congregation and each of us individually. May you have that sure hope of the resurrection, that no matter what is along the path to get there, that joy is at the end, and that joy comes into our lives now and in all its fullness at the end of time. So there's space for that joy of how God continually finds us and calls us back to the table of joy. Amen.